Here are some features of Indonesian. Indonesian has simple phonology and orthography. In general, one letter represents just one sound. Indonesian has simple SVO sentence structure. There are no case inflections.
I think that is the beauty of the language. Wow, this is so cool! What's happening, beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of IJayReaction. Selamat pagi, selamat siang, selamat sore, selamat malam. Senang bertemu denganmu. Apa kabar? Saya baik, terima kasih banyak. Dan kamu? Today, we're gonna watch a video about Bahasa Indonesia or Indonesian language. The video is from a channel in the name of Lang Focus. And the title of the video is The Indonesian Language, Bahasa Indonesia. I'm super excited to check it out. Without further ado, let's dive in. Sudah siap? Mari kita mulai. Let's see what we're gonna learn from this video. And let's dive in.
Follow Lang Focus on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hello everyone, welcome to the Lang Focus channel and my name is Paul. Today's topic is the Indonesian language, or Bahasa Indonesia as it's called in Indonesian. Indonesian is closely connected with Malay, so if you haven't seen my video on the Malay language yet, I recommend that you watch that first before you watch this video. Indonesian is based on Malay, though it has evolved and taken on some uniquely Indonesian features. There are about 43 million native speakers of Indonesian and about 155 million second language speakers of Indonesian, mainly in Indonesia, where it's the national language and the sole official language. Why does Indonesian have so many more second language speakers than native speakers? Well, there are hundreds of languages spoken in Indonesia, and Indonesian functions as a lingua franca between speakers of different languages. It's the language of education and of media, and these days everybody learns Indonesian, but most Indonesians still speak a different regional language as their native language. Plus Indonesian, the national language. How was the Indonesian language born? Indonesian is based on the Malay language, which has been a lingua franca.
This is so interesting, and I really enjoy watching it.
Of trade and of the elite throughout the Malay archipelago for centuries. The story of Indonesian begins during the colonial period. In the early 17th century, the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company, established a trading post at Batavia, the site of present-day Jakarta, and over the following 3 centuries expanded into other areas of present-day Indonesia. The Dutch East India Company made Malay the administrative language of its trading outpost. In 1799, the Dutch East India Company went bankrupt and the Dutch government took control of the colony. In the late 18th century, the British East India Company had also arrived in the archipelago, and in 1824, a treaty between the British and the Dutch divided the area between the British to the north and the Dutch to the south. In the Dutch colony, the promotion of the Dutch language and education in Dutch began, but only to a limited extent, mostly for the elite. Compared to other colonial powers, the Dutch were not really interested in changing the culture of the colonized people. Their main goal was to facilitate trade. Therefore, since Malay was already a lingua franca that could facilitate trade, there was no reason for them to introduce Dutch as a lingua franca. The Dutch promoted...
Honestly, I didn't know that much about Indonesia.
Malay as the language of education, recognizing Riau Malay, the classical Malay spoken in the Malacca and Johor Sultanates, as the standard language. This standard form of Malay continued to develop with the abundance of Malay literature in the 19th century, and in the 20th century, Malay linguists published dictionaries and grammars to further standardize and modernize the language. The Dutch language never became widespread in Indonesia. In fact, in 1940, only 2% of Indonesians spoke Dutch. But even though the role of...
It is impressive that native people stick to their own language and culture, and they didn't adopt another language. I'm pretty sure that the language might have borrowed some words from the other language, but still we can see that it has kept its own original form.
Of the Dutch language was very limited, a large number of Dutch loanwords entered the Malay language in the areas under Dutch control. And this is one of the things that made the Indonesian variety of Malay different from other varieties. In the early 20th century, a pro-independence movement arose and people throughout the Dutch colony began to see themselves as a single people, Indonesians. The term Indonesia was a new term for the archipelago, created by European ethnologists, but adopted by nationalists in the Dutch colony. At the Youth Conference of 1928, young nationalists declared the Youth Pledge with 3 ideals: one motherland, one nation, and one language. The language they chose, 3 ideals: one motherland,
Satu tanah air, satu bangsa, satu bahasa. Satu bahasa. So bahasa is language.
one nation, and one language. The language they chose was the Indonesian variety of Malay, which they named
Kami putra dan putri. Putri. Indonesia menjunjung bahasa persatuan bahasa Indonesia.
Bahasa Indonesia. When Indonesia declared independence in 1945, Indonesian was declared the national language of the new country. But why Indonesian? At the time of independence, Indonesian was the native language of only 5% of the population, while Javanese was the native language of over 40% of the population. So why wasn't Javanese chosen to be the national language? Well, that would have shown favoritism to Indonesia's largest ethnic group, undermining the national unity of the country. But Indonesian, previously known just as Malay, had been a lingua franca throughout the archipelago for centuries, so people in various regions of the country already knew some Malay. It was also a much simpler language than Javanese, and could realistically be learned by millions of people as a second language. Indonesian turned out to be the right choice, successfully becoming the language of government, education, trade, and communication between people in different regions of the country. Indonesian completely replaced the former colonial language Dutch as the language of public life, and that's something that's very rare in former colonies. Today, Indonesian is still the second language of most Indonesian people, but it's becoming increasingly more common as a native language, especially in the cities. That's because people from all over the country move to the big cities, so rather than speak their native regional languages, they speak Indonesian instead.
Honestly,
and some of them get married with each other, and they raise their children.
I have recently started memorizing some phrases and words in Indonesian, and it's so easy and it's a beautiful language. So I enjoy learning the language, and it's not difficult at all for me. That's why right now we are watching this video, because I'm so interested in the language and I love to learn more.
Regional languages, they speak Indonesian instead, and some of them get married with each other, and they raise their children speaking Indonesian as their primary language. So what is Indonesian like? Well, undoubtedly,
Let's dive
one of the
into
things
the
that made
language.
Indonesian so successful as a national language so quickly was its simplicity. If you've seen my video on Malay, then you're already familiar with the simplicity of Indonesian, because in its standard form, it's very close to standard Malay, just with some different vocabulary. Here are some features of Indonesian. Indonesian has simple phonology and orthography. In general, one letter represents just one sound. Indonesian has simple SVO sentence structure. There are no case inflections.
I think that is the beauty of the language, which is not becoming a confusing language for a new learner.
In Indonesian. There is also no grammatical gender in Indonesian. There's no plural form in Indonesian. And explicit plurals are made by reduplication. Reduplication meaning that you repeat the word again.
Oh.
And perhaps best,
these features are really unique and impressive.
Indonesian has simple SVO sentence structure. There are no case inflections in Indonesian. There is also no grammatical gender in Indonesian. There's no plural form in Indonesian. And explicit plurals are made by reduplication. Reduplication meaning that you repeat the word again.
Rumah house. Rumah houses. Is that the same structure with sama, which means you're welcome?
And perhaps best of all, no verb conjugations. Let's look at a few
Impressive.
Indonesian sentences and we'll identify some of those features.
Mereka sedang memasak telur untuk sarapan.
This sentence means they are cooking eggs for breakfast. Word
Mereka sedang memasak telur untuk sarapan.
for word, it's they now
Wait
cook
a minute. Is sarapan breakfast?
egg for breakfast.
I
We
was
can see
right.
that this sentence is SVO. As I said before, there are no verb conjugations.
Mereka sedang memasak telur untuk sarapan.
So how do we know that this action is happening now? Well, it's because of this word right here, sedang. This is an adverb that indicates that something is happening right now. You can change the tense of the verb by changing this adverb. Here's another sentence.
Mereka sudah memasak telur untuk sarapan.
After changing the word sedang to sudah, the sentence now means they cooked
They cooked eggs for breakfast. Mereka sudah memasak. telur untuk sarapan.
Eggs for breakfast. In the past tense, the adverb sudah means something like already and shows that an action has been completed. How about the future tense?
Mereka akan
Akan.
memasak telur untuk sarapan.
Here, akan is the future adverb. Another example.
Seperti saya, dia sering
I'll
berlibur
try
ke
to
Lombok.
guess the meaning
This
of the
means,
words.
like me,
Seperti saya, dia sering berlibur ke Lombok. Like me, he often travels to Lombok. Well, obviously Lombok is Lombok. Travels. Berlibur. Definitely berlibur is travel.
he often travels to Lombok. Word for word, it's like he often travel to Lombok.
I got it right.
Another example.
Apa kamu mau duduk?
Apa
This
kamu?
means-
Do you want to sit? Apa kamu mau duduk? Duduk is to sit?
Do you want to sit? Apa is a yes or no question marker. So word for word, it's question.
Just
you
like
want
apa kabar? Like any news?
sit, but apa is often
Duduk means sit. Duduk is the name of a musical instrument.
left out in speech. And notice that to express desire, you can just add mau right before another verb.
Mau.
The second verb doesn't change its form at all. Another example.
Saya menulis surat untuk teman saya.
This means
Saya menuli, like saya baik, I know. Like I am fine. So saya is I. Menuli surat untuk teman saya. I write letters for my friend. Saya at the first and the end of it. So saya is I and at the same time like a possessive adjective.
I write letters for my friend. Word for word, it's I write letter for friend I. Notice that the word for letters, surat, is the same as the singular form.
Surat.
Also notice that possession is shown by placing a personal pronoun right after a noun. Teman saya, literally friend I, means my friend. This makes it quite easy to form possessives.
And surat in Farsi means face.
Another example.
Saya tidak suka makan kacang.
This means I
Komodo dragon. Saya tidak suka makan. What was that? Kakajan?
Another example.
Saya tidak suka makan kacang.
This means I don't like eating
Kajan? Is that J? I don't like eating peanuts. Kacang. Kacang is peanuts.
peanuts. Word for word, it's I no like eat peanut. So we negate a sentence by adding tidak before
Tidak.
the verb. And notice that, similar to the word mau, which means want, we can express like by placing the word suka right before.
Wow, that's a tricky word. It means a different word in Russian, I guess. Saya tidak suka makan kacang. If you tell that word to a Russian speaker, they're gonna go crazy.
For another verb.
Kacang sudah dimakan.
This means the peanuts have already been eaten. Word by word, it's peanuts already be eaten.
Kacang
The verb
sudah
dimakan is a
dimakan.
passive. Let's take a look at some of the verbs from the above sentences. You can see that these Indonesian verbs have
This video is becoming more interesting than I thought. Dimakan, berlibur, mimasak, menulis.
two parts, a root in black and an affix in red. Indonesian has many such affixes that are added to roots to make verbs and nouns. One example, the root
Tulis.
meaning to write. We have
Menulis.
to write,
Ditulis.
to be written,
Tertulis.
to be written,
Tulisan.
something
Tertulis.
that's written,
Menuliskan.
to write something down,
Penulis.
Tertulis sounds like turtles.
a writer,
Penulisan.
the process of writing,
Bertuliskan.
to have written on it.
So now I'm gonna tell you a surprising thing. My mother tongue is Kurdish. In Kurdish, pencil or pen is benevis, the thing that you are writing with. Benevis is so similar to penulis, penulisan. Like it seems that they have similar roots.
Bertulisan.
With the writing or words. You can see more examples of such affixes in my video on Malay, which
There's a lot going on here. Menulis to write, ditulis to be written, tertulis to be written. The same? Ditulis, then what is the difference between these two words? Tulisan, something that is written. Menuliskan. This part is becoming a little bit complicated to write something down. Menuliskan.
Which functions in the same way. Affixes are the most challenging part of learning Indonesian, at least for a lot of learners, but you can make use of that feature of the roots and affixes to help you learn new words.
I must confess I'm wholeheartedly grateful to the channel of Lang Focus for this informative video, and I'm gonna definitely subscribe to their channel.
Words through their connections with other words. Standard Indonesian really is a simple language compared to other languages, but that's Standard Indonesian, which is normally used as the written language and in formal contexts. The way Indonesian is spoken in daily life is often fairly different from Standard Indonesian. Different varieties of colloquial Indonesian are spoken around
I know
the
that
country.
usually the spoken version is informal and the academic version is formal.
And they're influenced by the local native language in that area. These different varieties of Indonesian are
Bahasa
referred to
Gaul.
as Bahasa Gaul. The Bahasa Gaul of Jakarta is influenced by Betawi, the Malay Creole language that's native to Jakarta, as well as by Javanese and Sundanese, since people from all over Indonesia moved to Jakarta. Let's look at the Bahasa Gaul of Jakarta and see how it differs from Standard Indonesian. Here's a sentence we looked at before.
Mereka sedang memasak telur untuk sarapan.
Now in Bahasa Gaul,
Mereka lagi masak telur buat sarapan.
the first difference we see is that the word sedang,
Sedang
which
and
indicates
lagi.
present tense, is lagi in Bahasa Gaul. Lagi is also used in Standard Indonesian to mean again or still, but it's not used as a present tense marker like this. Another difference is that the verb memasak is used in its root form masak
Masak.
without the prefix. Then we have a sound difference in the word telur, which becomes like telur,
Telur.
and then untuk becomes buat, which can be used in Standard Indonesian, but the meaning is more like in order to. In Bahasa Gaul, you can use it to simply mean for.
Mereka sudah memasak telur untuk sarapan.
Now in Bahasa Gaul,
Mereka udah masak telur buat sarapan.
here notice that the word sudah is reduced to udah.
Mereka akan memasak telur untuk sarapan.
Now in Bahasa Gaul,
Mereka bakal masak telur buat sarapan.
and here notice that the future marker akan becomes bakal.
It seems that in Bahasa Gaul, they are trying to use the shorter version of their words to make it easier and faster to talk.
Another example.
Seperti saya, dia sering berlibur ke Lombok.
Now in Bahasa Gaul,
Kayak gue, dia sering liburan ke Lombok.
the first difference here is that the word seperti, meaning like, changes to kayak.
Kayak.
Then notice that saya becomes gue, which is a loan word from Betawi, and berlibur becomes liburan. The root is the same, but the affixes are different.
Apa kamu mau duduk?
In this example, we'll see two variations of Bahasa Gaul. The first variation
I like the word duduk, which means sit in Bahasa Indonesia, and as I said, it is the name of a musical instrument.
is a simple, casual sentence.
Kamu mau duduk gak?
Notice that the yes or
Duduk.
no question marker apa isn't there. Instead, at the end you see gak, which means no in Bahasa Gaul. So it's like, you want to sit, no? The second variation is used for close friends or people the same age as you or younger.
Lu
Lu mau duduk gak?
The second person pronoun is lu, which I believe is a loan word from Chinese, which is present in the Betawi Creole language of Jakarta. In this example, let's look at some options for first person pronouns.
Saya menulis surat untuk teman saya. Saya nulis surat buat teman saya. Aku nulis surat buat temenku. Gua nulis surat buat temen gue.
In a casual, polite sentence, you use saya, even in
Saya.
Bahasa Gaul. In a more casual, familiar sentence, aku is used. And when aku is used as a possessive, a shortened form is attached to the end of the noun. In a more intimate sentence, gua or gue is used. Also notice that menulis loses its prefix, but it doesn't revert to its root form tulis. Instead, it maintains the nasal sound at the beginning. And one more small difference we can see is that the word for friend, teman, is pronounced more like temen. And another example.
Saya tidak suka makan kacang.
Now in Bahasa Gaul,
Gua nggak demen makan kacang.
I learned the word like in Indonesian right away, and I will never forget that.
again, here we see the pronoun gua, and we see that the negative tidak becomes nga, which is related to the word gak, which we saw before. And in Bahasa Gaul, suka sometimes becomes demen. And one last example.
Kacang sudah dimakan.
Now in Bahasa Gaul,
Kacang udah dimakan.
here the
Udah.
only difference is that sudah becomes
Letter
udah,
S drops.
as we saw before. So you can see that the colloquial Indonesian of Jakarta is fairly different from standard Indonesian, and there are varieties like this spoken around the country. The influence of the other languages of Indonesia on colloquial Indonesian is one of the things that sets the language apart from other varieties of Malay. Indonesian is definitely a fun language to study, and communicating with Indonesians in their national language and lingua franca is an amazing experience. The question of the day for Indonesians: to what extent do you speak standard Indonesian? And to what extent do you speak Bahasa Gaul? And in what situations? Leave your comments down below. And for learners of Indonesian, what's been your experience communicating with Indonesian people? Do you find the standard Indonesian that you learn in textbooks to be useful? Or do you feel like you should be learning more of the language as it's really spoken?
That's a good question. I usually see the formal Bahasa Indonesia in the comments of my videos. Of course, I was today years old to be aware of the variations of Bahasa Indonesia, but as I said, I usually see people are commenting in formal Bahasa Indonesia on the channel.
To follow Langfocus on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And again, I'd like to say thank you very much to my Patreon supporters, especially the ones right here on the screen, for their monthly pledges. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
This was a super informative video, and I'm glad that we watched it. That's it, guys. I learned a lot about Bahasa Indonesia, and learning languages is so much fun. It shows that how words can be different while the feelings and the people are the same. I'm wholeheartedly grateful to you for sharing the link. Terima kasih banyak, and I appreciate you for watching the video. If you enjoyed watching it just like I did, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, and if you are new to my channel, do me a huge favor and hit the subscribe button. I want you to stay safe wherever you are. I'll definitely catch your next reaction videos, and peace and sampai jumpa.